The morning Elise arrived at Forrester Creations, the air itself seemed to pause. The building, sleek and shimmering with decades of ambition, had seen its share of storms, betrayals dressed as love, loyalties bought and sold under the guise of family honor. Yet nothing in its gilded corridors had prepared the Forresters for her. She appeared as a quiet figure at first, slender, well-composed, her auburn hair tied neatly, her posture as deliberate as her smile. She introduced herself as a new assistant from the acquisitions department, polite, competent, unassuming. But beneath that calm surface, Elise carried a past carefully folded like the letters she kept in her bag, yellowed pages inked in Stephanie Forrester's unmistakable handwriting, and documents that whispered of a secret fortune hidden long before any of them were born. In truth, Elise had rehearsed that moment for years. Each breath she took in those corridors was part of a plan woven from grief, pride, and vengeance. She had grown up far from the glamour of Los Angeles, in a quiet New England town where her grandmother's stories about a powerful sister named Stephanie had shaped her childhood. That sister had left home decades ago, married into wealth, and built an empire. But the letters told another story, of a betrayal, of a trust fund meant to restore the balance between two branches of the same bloodline, and of an agreement that was never honored. Stephanie, in her early years before Forrester Creations became legend, had promised to protect her sister's descendants if fate ever failed them. Yet somewhere along the glittering timeline of her life, that promise was buried. Elise's mother had died poor, bitter, and convinced that Stephanie's family had erased them from existence. By the time Elise found the box of letters hidden in an attic chest, she knew exactly what she had to do. Her entrance into Forrester wasn't accidental, it was surgical. She studied every name, every position, every scandal that had ever shaped the company. She learned the rhythms of their board meetings, the patterns of their alliances, the vulnerabilities that came with old age and memory. When she applied for her position, she used credentials too polished to question, backed by forged references that traced back to real agencies. Her manner was so calm, so efficient, that no one noticed the quiet flicker in her eyes when she walked past Stephanie's portrait hanging above the main lobby. To her, that painting wasn't art. It was a ghost staring back at her, both enemy and ancestor. At first, Elise kept her distance. She observed Eric Forrester from afar, the patriarch still commanding respect, but softer now, more nostalgic, often lost in the past. She noticed how his voice trembled slightly when he spoke of Stephanie, how he lingered over her old sketches or the china set she had once chosen for the dining room. Elise saw what she needed, a man still bound by love to the woman whose legacy she claimed. Slowly, she began to draw near, never too quickly, always careful to appear accidental, offering help with cataloging old files, suggesting restorations for designs from Stephanie's early years, asking gentle questions about the company's history. Each word, each glance, was calculated to awaken something in Eric that had been dormant for years, the ache of memory. Eric began to trust her. He would smile when she entered the room, calling her the only one around here who remembers when we used to dream. Sometimes, he would tell stories that trailed off mid-sentence, and Elise would listen quietly, allowing the silence to do the work. The resemblance between her and a young Stephanie wasn't lost on anyone. It was in the tilt of her chin, the poise of her walk, the sharp intelligence that flickered behind her eyes. Even Ridge noticed it, though he dismissed her as a manipulative opportunist. But Eric, lonely and yearning for something pure amid the chaos of family feuds, saw in Elise a reflection of the woman who had once been his anchor. Days turned into weeks, and Elise's plan advanced with precision. She began recording conversations, discreetly, effortlessly. Meetings about finances, legal disputes, property rights, anything that could later serve as ammunition. Her small studio apartment became a map of connections, photographs of the Forrester family, copies of internal memos, handwritten notes tracing every inconsistency in the company's legal filings. She discovered that Stephanie had indeed created a trust in the late 1980s, one tied to a charitable foundation that mysteriously dissolved after her death. The money had never been accounted for. The signatures on the dissolution papers bore Ridge's approval, though at the time, he had denied knowing anything about it. Elise suspected that those funds were absorbed quietly into Forrester's private accounts, used to maintain its empire while erasing her family's claim. But as her evidence grew, so did her inner conflict. There were moments, fleeting, unguarded, when she looked at Eric and felt something dangerously human. He spoke of regret with such honesty that it pierced the armor she had built. She began to wonder if Stephanie herself might have kept secrets from him, if perhaps the betrayal wasn't his but hers. The possibility unsettled her. Yet she couldn't turn back. The plan had already taken on a life of its own. One evening, Eric invited her to dinner at the mansion. The invitation was innocent, born of gratitude, but for Elise it marked a turning point. She walked into that house as though stepping into the heart of everything she had ever imagined. The sweeping staircase, the scent of polished wood and roses, the portrait of Stephanie watching over the living room like a silent queen. For a brief moment, Elise felt something akin to belonging. But as the family gathered, Ridge with his guarded suspicion, Brooke with her poised politeness, Donna with her nervous charm, she realized that the warmth she saw was only surface. The Forresters were a family built on tension, held together by appearances. She didn't need to destroy them. They were already cracking. All she had to do was show the world where the fractures lay. It was at that dinner that she revealed her first card. Casually, she mentioned her fascination with Stephanie's early philanthropic ventures, the trust funds, the charities, the scholarships. Eric's face softened, while Ridge's hardened. When she produced one of the old letters, Stephanie's handwriting unmistakable, the room fell silent. The letter spoke of a sister's child, of a responsibility to ensure that the bloodline outside Los Angeles is not forgotten. Eric trembled as he read it, his fingers brushing the faded ink. Brooke tried to question its authenticity, but Eric silenced her with a look that was part wonder, part pain. That night, Elise left the mansion knowing she had planted the first seed of doubt, not in the company, but in their hearts. Over the following weeks, tensions escalated. Eric began to question old financial records, requesting audits, reopening sealed files. Ridge grew defensive, accusing Elise of manipulation, but his father's faith in her only deepened the divide. Elise fed that fracture skillfully, offering sympathy to Eric while quietly provoking Ridge's pride. Every family meeting became a battleground, and every confrontation gave her more information. The more they fought, the clearer her path became. But guilt began to gnaw at her resolve. Eric's kindness disarmed her. He treated her not as an outsider, but as someone sacred, a living memory of the woman he had loved and lost. There were nights she couldn't sleep, haunted by the thought that she might be breaking a man who had already lost too much. And yet, when she looked at the letters, when she remembered her mother's tears and the poverty that shadowed their lives, her purpose burned anew. Justice, she told herself, demanded cruelty. The final act unfolded at the quarterly board meeting. The conference room was packed. Executives, shareholders, attorneys. Eric sat at the head of the table, visibly weary, while Ridge stood to his right, his eyes sharp and guarded. Elise, dressed in black, entered with a folder in her hand and an expression of serene certainty. She began by thanking the board for their trust, then laid the documents on the table, a notarized copy of a supplemental will signed by Stephanie Forrester in 1994. The silence was suffocating. Eric's eyes widened as he read the first lines. The document designated a previously unknown heir, Elise Harrington, as trustee and beneficiary of a separate fund tied directly to Forrester Creations' voting shares. The clause stated that, in the event of any internal dispute regarding leadership, the trustees' vote shall be considered binding. Elise's voice remained steady as she explained that she had come forward not to claim wealth, but to claim her rightful place as Stephanie's bloodline representative, and that she now held the deciding vote in any restructuring of ownership. The room erupted. Brooke accused her of fraud. Ridge demanded legal verification. But Eric said nothing. His eyes were on Elise, searching, trembling, torn between disbelief and recognition. "You look just like her," he whispered, and that single sentence fractured the last of his certainty. From that moment, the empire descended into chaos. Investigations began, lawyers circled, and every secret long buried began to surface. Elise watched it unfold with a mix of triumph and despair. She had achieved what she came for. She had made them see her, forced them to confront the past they tried to erase. Yet victory felt hollow. The Forrester legacy she had fought to expose wasn't a fortress of villains. It was a labyrinth of broken people, each clinging to the myth of honor while betraying one another to survive. In the end, no one knew who Elise truly was. DNA tests were ordered, but results vanished under mysterious circumstances. Some believed she was genuine, Stephanie's niece, the long-lost heir of a forgotten promise. Others whispered that she was a con artist of extraordinary talent, a woman who studied the family so well she could mimic their ghosts. Eric, heartbroken but entranced, withdrew from public life, unable to face the possibility that he had been deceived again. Ridge tightened his grip on the company, vowing to erase Elise's influence, while Brooke fought to keep the family from tearing itself apart. Elise disappeared as quietly as she had arrived. Some said she fled the country after selling her shares. Others claimed she stayed in Los Angeles under another name, still watching from the shadows. But there were rumors, always rumors, that a sealed letter was later found in Eric's study, written in Stephanie's unmistakable hand, confirming that once, long ago, she had a niece named Elise. Whether the woman who had torn through their lives was that child or a brilliant pretender, no one could say. But her presence left a mark that could never be erased. And so, in the shimmering twilight of the Forrester mansion, the family that had built its fortune on beauty was once again haunted by blood, secrets, and ghosts. Stephanie's portrait still hung above the stairs, her painted eyes unblinking, as if she were watching it all unfold, a smile hovering on her lips, as though she alone knew the truth. Weeks passed after Elise's sudden disappearance, but her shadow remained everywhere inside Forrester Creations. It lingered in boardrooms, where whispered arguments replaced once confident decisions, in the mansion's hallways, where the portraits of Stephanie seemed to watch more intently than ever, and in Eric's eyes, which now carried a quiet vacancy that frightened everyone who loved him. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew the truth. The empire had been shaken, and it might never recover. Elise had come like a ghost, and like a ghost, she had left behind doubt, guilt, and an echo that would not fade. Eric spent his days wandering through his study, rereading the letters Elise had shown him. The paper was fragile, the handwriting familiar yet strange. It looked like Stephanie's, felt like her, but carried a different tone, softer, almost remorseful. He would trace each word with trembling fingers, trying to understand. Had Stephanie truly written these letters, or had Elise forged an entire history to manipulate him? The uncertainty gnawed at him until sleep became impossible. He stopped attending meetings, left decisions to Ridge and Brooke, and spent long hours sitting in the garden that Stephanie had once tended. Sometimes he thought he saw Elise there, standing among the roses, her figure fading into sunlight. Ridge, meanwhile, was determined to bury her legacy. He hired private investigators, legal teams, digital experts, anyone who could discredit her. But every trail he followed seemed to double back into confusion. The law firm that had authenticated the supplemental will no longer existed. The notary's license had expired years before the document was signed. Yet the signatures themselves, when analyzed, were deemed authentic. The handwriting matched Stephanie's perfectly. Ridge's frustration boiled into rage. He wanted to believe it was all a fraud, that Elise was a master manipulator who had preyed on his father's grief. But a small, poisonous part of him feared she might have been telling the truth, that Stephanie, in her final years, had doubted her own family enough to entrust part of Forrester's power to a stranger. Brooke watched Ridge unravel, and though she stood by him publicly, in private she wondered the same thing. There had been moments, rare, fleeting, when Elise's mannerisms mirrored Stephanie's so perfectly it had chilled her. The way she spoke about legacy, about strength, about forgiveness through power. It was as if the old matriarch had returned, not in body but in spirit, to punish them for their sins. Brooke often woke in the middle of the night to the echo of Elise's calm voice from that fateful meeting, declaring herself the bloodline representative. Sometimes she thought she could still hear it in the hum of the air conditioning, in the soft click of her heels across the marble floor. One evening, as the sun set over the Los Angeles skyline, a courier arrived at the mansion with a sealed envelope addressed to Eric. It bore no return name, only the imprint of a golden crest, the same emblem that had appeared on the trust documents Elise presented. Eric opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a simple note written in elegant cursive. "The truth is never buried. It is only delayed. Meet me at the old Beverly Hills property. Midnight." There was no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was Elise's. Against Ridge's protests, Eric went. He told no one where he was going, only that he needed to see for himself. The old property had once belonged to Stephanie's sister, a house long abandoned, its windows boarded, its garden overgrown. The night was cold, the air heavy with jasmine and decay. When Eric arrived, the gate creaked open as if it had been waiting for him. Inside, candlelight flickered through the broken windows. And there she was, Elise, standing by the fireplace, dressed in black, her expression unreadable. For a long time neither spoke. The tension between them was almost holy, as if two eras of the same soul were meeting. Finally, Elise broke the silence. "I didn't want to disappear," she said quietly. "But they would have destroyed me before I could prove anything." She handed Eric a folder. Inside were photographs, legal documents, financial transfers, and one final letter written by Stephanie herself, sealed and dated 2 years before her death. The letter changed everything. Stephanie confessed that she had created a trust, not out of charity, but out of guilt. Decades ago, before Forrester Creations became an empire, she had borrowed money from her sister's inheritance to fund the company's first collection. She had promised to repay it once the business succeeded, but she never did. When her sister died, Stephanie buried the truth, fearing it would tarnish her legacy. The trust was meant to restore what was taken, to give her sister's descendants what was rightfully theirs. But by the time she tried to act, she was too ill to manage it herself. She named Elise's mother as beneficiary, but after her death, Ridge and the board quietly absorbed the assets, believing no one would ever discover the connection. Eric's hands shook as he read. He had always known Stephanie carried secrets, but not this. Not the weight of theft disguised as triumph. Tears blurred his vision as he realized that Elise hadn't been lying, not entirely. She was indeed blood. Her mother was Stephanie's niece. The Forrester dynasty had been built, in part, on borrowed money and broken promises. But before he could speak, Elise said something that pierced through his guilt. "You're not the one I came for, Eric. You loved her. That's more than anyone else did. I came for the ones who buried the truth, the ones who turned her confession into profit." Her voice trembled, not with rage but sorrow. "They left my family to rot while pretending to honor her memory. And I became what I hated, another manipulator, another liar, just to make them listen." Eric wanted to help her, to fix everything, but before he could offer forgiveness, headlights flared outside. Ridge had followed him. The doors burst open, and Ridge stormed in, his anger boiling over. He accused Elise of deception, of preying on an old man's grief. Eric tried to intervene, but the confrontation spiraled out of control. Elise, cornered and desperate, revealed the final piece of her plan, an audio recording. When she played it, the room fell silent. The recording captured a conversation between Ridge and the company's former attorney, discussing the reallocation of funds from a dormant trust into Forrester's private accounts. His voice was clear, cold, unmistakable. Eric's eyes widened with betrayal. Ridge froze, realizing too late that Elise had outmaneuvered him completely. "You think I forged this?" she whispered. "You think I'm the only one lying?" Eric's heart broke in that instant. His son, his pride, his heir, caught on tape committing the very act that had destroyed everything Stephanie stood for. Rage and sorrow clashed within him until he could barely speak. Rich tried to defend himself, claiming it was business, that he had done it to protect the family name, but the damage was done. The dynasty had eaten its own. The following morning, the news broke. A leaked recording. An anonymous package sent to the press. Forrester Creations was under federal investigation for financial misconduct. Rich's career imploded overnight. Brooke distanced herself, and Eric collapsed under the weight of shame. Elise vanished again, her name whispered like a curse in every corner of the industry. Some called her a fraud. Others hailed her as the ghost of justice that had come to reclaim what was stolen. Months passed. The company survived, but it was smaller now, quieter. Eric retired fully, leaving the brand to be rebuilt by the next generation. Rich lived in isolation, haunted by his father's silence. Brooke tried to mend what remained, but trust had become a luxury none of them could afford. And then, one spring morning, Eric received another envelope. Inside was a single photograph, a little girl standing before a gravestone marked Elise Harrington, 1991 to 2024. But the date of death was circled in red, and beneath it, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Legacies don't die. They evolve." Eric looked out the window, toward the horizon that glowed gold over Beverly Hills. For a moment, he thought he saw her again, the same poised figure walking along the garden path, her hair catching the sun. Whether it was his imagination or her ghost, he couldn't tell. But deep down, he knew one thing: Elise had not come to destroy Forrester Creations. She had come to remind them what it cost to build an empire on secrets. And somewhere, beyond the glittering skyline, Elise was still out there, no longer the avenger or the heir, but something more dangerous, the keeper of truth.